March 15th, 1943. 0347 hours, Eastern Front, Soviet Union. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov pressed his eye against the rifle scope, watching German armor emerge from the morning mist like steel phantoms materializing from hell itself. 12 Panzer IV tanks rolled toward his position in perfect formation, their tracks churning the frozen mud into dark ribbons of destruction. Behind them came the infantry, grey-clad figures moving with mechanical precision through the snow-covered birch forest. The Wehrmacht advance had begun exactly as intelligence predicted. What intelligence had not predicted was that one Soviet rifleman with a ridiculous idea and 30 seconds of preparation time would turn the most sophisticated armored assault of the day into a smoldering graveyard. This is the story of how military doctrine, technological superiority, and tactical brilliance were defeated by a farm boy from Smolensk who understood something about physics that German engineers had somehow overlooked. A man who proved that sometimes the most effective weapons are not the ones found in military manuals, but the ones improvised by soldiers who refuse to die according to schedule. To understand what Dmitry Volkov accomplished that March morning, you need to understand what he was facing. The German formation approaching his position represented the cutting edge of armored warfare doctrine. Each Panzer IV mounted a long-barreled 75mm gun capable of penetrating Soviet armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Their frontal armor, 80mm of hardened steel, could deflect anything the Red Army possessed except direct hits from anti-tank guns. The tanks moved in coordinated diamond formations, covering each other's blind spots while maintaining interlocking fields of fire. Behind the armor came 2 companies of Panzer Grenadiers, veteran infantry equipped with machine guns, Panzerfausts, and the combat experience of 2 years fighting across Europe. The force advancing toward Volkov's position had been specifically assembled for this operation. Kampfgruppe Müller, commanded by Major Heinrich Müller, was tasked with seizing the railway junction at Krasny Most, a critical supply hub for Soviet forces defending the Kursk salient. The Germans needed this junction intact. Soviet commanders knew they could not allow its capture. The mathematics were simple. If Müller's Kampfgruppe reached the railway yard, they would cut the supply line feeding 3 Soviet divisions. If they failed, the entire German offensive in this sector would stall for lack of logistical support. Müller had planned the assault with Germanic thoroughness. Artillery would suppress known Soviet positions at 0400 hours. The Panzer spearhead would advance along the main road while infantry cleared flanking positions through the forest. Resistance was expected to be minimal. Soviet forces in this sector had been retreating for 3 days, abandoning equipment and positions under pressure from the broader German offensive. Intelligence reports indicated perhaps 1 company of Soviet infantry remained in the area, likely rearguard elements with limited anti-tank capability. What German intelligence had failed to detect was Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, dug into a concealed position 800 meters from the main road. Volkov was not supposed to be there. His unit, the 284th Guards Rifle Regiment, had been ordered to withdraw 12 hours earlier. Most of his comrades had complied, falling back to prepared positions 5 kilometers to the east. Volkov had remained behind for reasons that would become legendary throughout the Red Army and incomprehensible to German tactical analysts. The 22-year-old officer from Smolensk had volunteered to stay behind as part of a 4-man observation team tasked with reporting German movements via radio. The mission was straightforward: observe, report, withdraw when contact became imminent. Under no circumstances were they to engage superior forces. Their equipment reflected the mission's limited scope: 1 radio set, 2 rifles, basic ammunition, rations for 48 hours. No anti-tank weapons, no heavy machine guns, no equipment for sustained combat operations. By dawn on March 15th, 3 of the 4-man team were dead. A German patrol had discovered their primary observation post at 0200 hours. In the firefight that followed, Volkov had escaped with the radio and his rifle, but his comrades had died buying him time to reach secondary positions. For 5 hours, he had hidden in a camouflaged dugout originally prepared for artillery observers, watching German preparations through his rifle scope and radioing intelligence to headquarters. The radio messages told the story of impossible odds. At 0230 hours, German armor concentration observed, 12 medium tanks with infantry support. At 0315 hours, artillery preparation beginning, targeting suspected Soviet positions. At 0340 hours, advance elements moving toward railway junction, estimated arrival 0420 hours. Each message received the same response from headquarters. Continue observation, withdraw when contact imminent, do not engage. Volkov understood his orders. He also understood something else that headquarters could not see from their bunkers 20 kilometers away. The German formation was advancing along a single road through terrain that offered no alternate routes. Heavy spring thaw had turned the surrounding fields into impassable mud. The forest on both flanks was too dense for armored vehicles. The panzers would have to advance in column along the road, vulnerable to anyone positioned on the wooded heights overlooking their route. More importantly, Volkov had noticed something about the lead tank that German crews themselves had apparently missed. The Panzer IV carried external fuel tanks, additional jerry cans strapped to the rear deck to extend operational range. This was standard practice for extended operations, allowing tanks to operate beyond their normal fuel capacity without requiring supply convoys to follow immediately. The modification was tactically sound and operationally necessary. It was also incredibly dangerous in ways that Volkov understood, but German doctrine apparently did not. At 0347 hours, as the German column approached his position, Volkov made a decision that violated every order he had received. Instead of withdrawing, instead of continuing to observe, instead of following military protocol, he chambered a round in his Mosin-Nagant rifle and settled into a firing position. The rifle itself was unremarkable, a standard infantry weapon produced by the millions in Soviet factories. The ammunition was equally standard, 7.62 by 54 mm rounds, with steel core bullets designed for anti-personnel use. Neither weapon nor ammunition was designed for engaging armored targets. What Volkov had noticed through his rifle scope was that the external fuel tanks on the lead Panzer IV were not armored. They were simple steel containers, perhaps 5 mm thick, containing high-octane gasoline. The tank commander, visible in his open hatch, was positioned directly above these fuel tanks. The geometry was perfect for what Volkov had in mind. The physics of what happened next would be debated by ballistics experts for decades. A standard 7.62 mm rifle bullet cannot penetrate tank armor. It cannot disable mechanical systems. It cannot harm crew members inside armored fighting vehicles. But it can puncture thin steel containers filled with volatile liquids. And when those containers are attached to vehicles with hot exhaust systems, when they are positioned near electrical equipment, when they contain fuel under pressure, the results can be spectacular. Volkov's first shot struck the lead tank's external fuel tank at exactly 0348 hours. The steel core bullet penetrated the thin container wall and exited through the opposite side. Gasoline immediately began spraying across the tank's rear deck, soaking the engine compartment and running down the sides of the vehicle. The tank commander, Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, noticed the fuel leak immediately. He ordered his driver to halt while he assessed the situation. Weber's decision to stop was tactically correct, but strategically catastrophic. The lead tank's halt forced the entire column to stop on the narrow road. 12 panzers sat motionless in perfect formation while Weber examined his fuel system. The delay lasted exactly 90 seconds, long enough for Volkov to reload and acquire his second target. The second shot struck a fuel tank on the third vehicle in column. Again, the bullet penetrated thin steel and created a massive fuel leak. Again, the tank commander ordered a halt to assess damage. Again, the column remained stationary, while crews attempted to understand what was happening to their vehicles. By this point, German commanders were beginning to realize they faced an unprecedented situation. Their tanks were not being engaged by anti-tank guns or artillery. No explosions marked the impact of conventional weapons. Instead, Their vehicles were simply beginning to leak fuel from perfectly round holes that appeared without warning. The source of these holes remained invisible, hidden somewhere in the forest overlooking the road. Major Müller, commanding the Kampfgruppe from his position in the fourth tank, ordered his vehicles to continue advancing despite the fuel leaks. The mission remained critical. The railway junction had to be seized regardless of minor mechanical problems. His decision demonstrated the tactical flexibility that made German armoured formations so effective throughout the war. It also demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what was actually happening to his vehicles. Volkov's third shot created the chain reaction that would transform a minor tactical engagement into a catastrophic defeat for German armour doctrine. The bullet struck an external fuel tank on the second vehicle in column at the exact moment the tank's engine backfired. The combination of leaking gasoline, hot exhaust gases, and electrical sparks created an explosion that could be heard 15 kilometers away. The Panzer IV disappeared in a fireball that rose 60 meters above the road. The explosion consumed not only the target vehicle, but ignited fuel leaking from the lead tank. Within seconds, both vehicles were burning uncontrollably. Ammunition began cooking off inside the tanks, creating secondary explosions that shattered windows in the nearest village. Black smoke rose into the morning sky like a funeral pyre for German tactical doctrine. The chain reaction continued as burning fuel spread across the road surface. The fourth tank, advancing too closely behind the burning vehicles, could not stop in time. Its tracks carried it through pools of flaming gasoline that ignited its own external fuel tanks. 3 panzers were now burning, their crews bailing out into machine gun fire that Volkov had not yet begun to deliver. In less than 4 minutes, a single rifleman with 30 rounds of standard ammunition had destroyed 3 tanks, blocked a major roadway, and created a tactical disaster that would force the entire German offensive to halt pending investigation of what headquarters initially assumed was a new Soviet anti-tank weapon. The burning panzers created more than tactical chaos. They created psychological terror that rippled through the entire German formation like shockwaves from an artillery barrage. Tank commanders who had operated with confidence across Europe suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they could not see, could not locate, and could not understand. Their armour, their speed, their firepower meant nothing against an opponent who could apparently ignite their vehicles at will from invisible positions. Obergefreiter Hans Richter, commanding the 5th tank in column, watched the lead vehicles burn and made a decision that would haunt him for the remainder of the war. Instead of advancing through the flames, instead of following doctrine that demanded aggressive movement under fire, he ordered his driver to reverse. The massive Panzer IV began backing down the narrow road, its tracks churning mud and ice as Richter attempted to find maneuver room in terrain that offered none. The reversal created a domino effect throughout the column. Tank after tank began backing up, their commanders convinced they faced a new Soviet weapon system that could destroy armour from concealed positions. Radio traffic exploded with confused reports. Unknown anti-tank weapon engaging column. Multiple vehicles destroyed by invisible enemy. Request immediate artillery support on suspected positions. But Volkov was not finished. The retreating German armour presented him with targets that violated every principle of armoured warfare he had learned during his brief military training. The panzers were bunched together on a single road, unable to manoeuvre. Their commanders focused on escape rather than engaging the enemy. Most critically, they continued to carry external fuel tanks that made them vulnerable to the same simple technique that had destroyed the lead elements. His 4th shot struck the reversing 5th tank as it attempted to back past a burning wreck. The bullet punctured the external fuel container with the same mechanical precision as his previous shots. Gasoline cascaded across the vehicle's rear deck, soaking the engine compartment and creating a vapor cloud that hung in the cold morning air like a death sentence waiting for ignition. Richter, standing in his commander's hatch, saw the fuel leak and understood immediately what would happen next. He had watched 3 vehicles explode in identical fashion. He knew his tank would be next. The knowledge created a panic that overrode years of training and discipline. Instead of ordering his crew to bail out in tactical formation, instead of following evacuation procedures, Richter simply screamed "Abandon tank" and threw himself from the turret. The crew's evacuation was chaotic and exposed. They tumbled from hatches without coordination, without covering fire, without consideration for the sniper who was systematically destroying their formation. Volkov, still concealed in his observation post, watched German tank crews abandon perfectly functional vehicles and felt a grim satisfaction that had nothing to do with military victory and everything to do with survival. The abandoned tank continued reversing under its own momentum until it struck the vehicle behind it. The collision created sparks that ignited the leaking fuel. The 5th Panzer IV joined its comrades in the growing conflagration that was consuming Kampfgruppe Möller's entire spearhead. Major Müller, witnessing the systematic destruction of his armoured formation by an enemy he could not identify, made a decision that revealed both his tactical competence and his complete misunderstanding of the situation. He ordered his infantry companies to dismount and advance through the forest to locate and destroy what he assumed was a Soviet anti-tank gun position. 200 Panzer Grenadiers began moving through the birch trees, their machine guns and Panzerfausts ready to engage the heavy weapons that must be responsible for such devastating effectiveness against armour. The German infantry advance was executed with textbook precision. Squads moved in coordinated bounds, covering each other while advancing towards suspected enemy positions. Machine gun teams established overwatch positions. Grenadiers with Panzerfausts moved forward to engage detected anti-tank guns. The operation demonstrated the efficiency that made German infantry tactical formations feared throughout Europe, but they were advancing to engage an enemy that existed only in their tactical doctrine. Volkov remained alone in his concealed position, armed with nothing more sophisticated than a bolt-action rifle and an understanding of basic chemistry. The elaborate infantry assault was directed against positions that contained no anti-tank guns, no heavy weapons, no equipment beyond what a single Soviet soldier could carry. As German infantry swept through the forest, Volkov faced a decision that would determine whether his improvised defense would become a legendary victory or a futile gesture followed by inevitable capture. He could remain in position and continue engaging the remaining tanks, knowing that German infantry would eventually locate his position. Or he could withdraw, abandoning the tactical advantage he had created, but preserving his own life and the intelligence he had gathered. The decision was complicated by the radio messages he continued receiving from headquarters. Soviet command, monitoring German radio traffic, had detected the chaos in Kampfgruppe Möller's formation. They knew something extraordinary was happening but could not determine the cause. Volkov's position reports had become the only reliable intelligence about German dispositions in the sector. At 0356 hours, headquarters transmitted new orders that changed everything. Hold position. Reinforce arriving your location. 0430 hours. Continue engagement enemy armor. The message indicated that Soviet forces were responding to the unexpected opportunity Volkov had created. Reinforcements were en route, but they would not arrive for 34 minutes. Volkov looked at his remaining ammunition. 26 rounds. He looked at the German tanks still functioning on the road below. 8 vehicles remained operational, though their crews had become increasingly cautious about advancing through the killing zone their comrades had created. He looked at the German infantry advancing through the forest toward his position, perhaps 10 minutes before they reached his dugout. The mathematics were simple. He had 26 bullets and 40 minutes to hold a position against overwhelming odds. The ammunition was barely sufficient to continue his fuel tank technique against the remaining armor. The time was insufficient to eliminate the infantry threat. The odds of survival were negligible under any conventional tactical analysis, but Volkov had already demonstrated that conventional tactical analysis meant nothing when applied to unconventional methods. His success against German armor had not resulted from superior firepower or tactical doctrine. It had resulted from recognizing a vulnerability that existed in German equipment design and exploiting that vulnerability with whatever weapons were available. Now he applied the same unconventional thinking to his infantry problem. German soldiers advancing through the forest were following predictable patterns, moving along natural corridors, avoiding obstacles that might slow their advance. They were also carrying equipment that made them vulnerable in ways they probably did not recognize. Every German soldier carried ammunition, grenades, and equipment that could explode if struck by rifle fire. Their steel helmets could deflect bullets, but also reflect muzzle flashes, revealing positions to observers. Their grey uniforms provided excellent camouflage against winter terrain, but made them visible against the dark bark of birch trees. Most importantly, German tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive movement and coordinated advances. Squads stayed together, supported each other, moved as units rather than individuals. This coordination made them effective against conventional enemies, but created opportunities for a sniper who understood how to exploit group psychology. Volkov's fifth shot was not aimed at a tank. It targeted the ammunition pouches of a German machine gunner advancing through the trees 60 meters from his position. The bullet struck the soldier's equipment belt, detonating small arms ammunition and creating an explosion that dropped the man instantly while alerting his entire squad to the direction of enemy fire. The German response was immediate and overwhelming. Machine gun fire raked the forest where Volkov's muzzle flash had appeared. Rifle fire poured into suspected positions. Grenades exploded among the trees as German soldiers attempted to suppress the sniper who had killed their comrade. But Volkov was no longer in the position where his muzzle flash had appeared. He had fired, rolled, and moved to a secondary position prepared hours earlier during his initial reconnaissance. The German fire was devastating and completely ineffective, directed at terrain that no longer contained any Soviet forces. From his new position, Volkov observed the German reaction with professional interest. Their fire discipline was excellent, their coordination impressive, their tactical movement textbook perfect. They were also revealing their positions, their numbers, and their advance routes to an enemy they could not locate. His sixth shot targeted another ammunition carrier, creating another explosion and another burst of misdirected German fire. His seventh shot struck a grenadier's Panzerfaust, creating a much larger explosion that wounded several soldiers and created panic among troops who could not determine where the attacks were originating. The psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers who had advanced confidently through European forests for 2 years suddenly found themselves facing an enemy who could apparently cause their own equipment to explode without warning. Every ammunition pouch became a potential bomb. Every grenade became a liability. Every piece of equipment became a target that could kill the man carrying it. The German advance slowed, then stopped, then began to falter as soldiers became increasingly reluctant to move through terrain where their own weapons might be turned against them. Squad leaders found themselves shouting orders at men who had gone to ground and refused to advance into what appeared to be a minefield of their own equipment. Major Muller, monitoring the radio traffic from his infantry companies, realized that his tactical situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. His armor was burning on the road. His infantry was pinned down in the forest by an enemy of unknown size and capability. His mission timeline was collapsing as minutes passed without progress toward the railway junction. At 04:08 hours, 20 minutes after the engagement began, Muller made the decision that would transform a local tactical defeat into a strategic disaster for the entire German offensive. He requested immediate artillery support on his own positions, calling down fire on the forest where his infantry was pinned, and the road where his armor was burning. The artillery request revealed the complete breakdown of German tactical doctrine when faced with unconventional warfare. Rather than continuing to advance, rather than adapting to unexpected conditions, rather than developing new methods to counter an unknown enemy, German commanders chose to destroy the battlefield itself. The first artillery shells began falling at 04:15 hours. German guns, firing from positions 12 kilometers away, dropped high explosive rounds into the forest where Kampfgruppe Müller's infantry was fighting for their lives. The bombardment was accurate, devastating, and completely indiscriminate. German shells killed German soldiers as efficiently as they destroyed trees, equipment, and terrain. Volkov, crouched in his reinforced dugout, felt the earth shake with each explosion. Shrapnel whined through the air above his position. Tree trunks shattered and fell across his concealed entrance. But the dugout held. and he remained alive while German artillery systematically destroyed the forest around him. The bombardment lasted 15 minutes and accomplished nothing except the elimination of German forces that might have eventually located and eliminated the Soviet sniper. When the shelling stopped, the forest was a wasteland of shattered trees and cratered earth. German infantry casualties exceeded Soviet casualties by a ratio of approximately 20-1. At 0430 hours, exactly as headquarters had promised, Soviet reinforcements arrived at Volkov's position. A company of Guards infantry, supported by anti-tank guns and mortars, emerged from concealed positions and began engaging the surviving German forces. The battle that followed was conventional, predictable, and completely one-sided. German forces, already demoralized by their encounter with an invisible enemy, could not withstand coordinated assault by fresh Soviet troops. The remaining panzers, still carrying external fuel tanks, were systematically destroyed by conventional anti-tank weapons. German infantry, scattered and confused by their own artillery, surrendered in groups rather than continuing organized resistance. By 0500 hours, Kampfgruppe Müller had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. 12 tanks destroyed, 200 infantry casualties, mission failed, timeline collapsed. The railway junction at Krasny, most remained in Soviet hands. The German offensive in this sector ground to a halt pending investigation of what had gone wrong. The official German after-action report filed by the surviving officers of Kampfgruppe Müller made no mention of a single Soviet rifleman with 30 rounds of ammunition. Instead, it described a coordinated ambush by unknown anti-tank weapons, supported by artillery and reinforced by fresh infantry formations. The report estimated Soviet strength at company level, with specialized equipment designed for fuel system attacks. German intelligence analyzed the engagement for weeks, searching for evidence of new Soviet weapons technology that could explain the systematic destruction of external fuel tanks. Tank crews who survived the engagement provided testimony that revealed the complete psychological breakdown of German tactical confidence. Obergefreiter Weber, commander of the lead vehicle, reported that his tank had been engaged by precision fire from concealed positions using weapons that created fuel leaks without penetrating armor. His description matched similar reports from other survivors, all describing impossible accuracy against targets that conventional weapons could not effectively engage. The technical analysis conducted by German engineers focused on fuel tank vulnerability and protection measures. Recommendations included relocating external fuel containers, adding armor protection, and developing alternate fuel storage systems. The report concluded that existing Panzer designs contained critical vulnerabilities that enemy forces had learned to exploit using specialized equipment. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov survived the war, received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, and returned to his farm in Smolensk, where he never spoke of what happened that March morning. German tank crews, however, never forgot the lesson. External fuel tanks disappeared from panzer formations within weeks, replaced by internal systems that sacrificed range for survival. Sometimes the most devastating weapons are not found in arsenals, but in the minds of soldiers who refuse to accept that superior technology guarantees victory.